and welcome to another episode of Strange Planet. We are here with psychic intuitive counselor Robert Lindsey Milne, teacher, healer, life coach. He's here to discuss his psychic life, helping people through his gifts. And I think you're going to be fascinated by his work with a coma patient, how he was able to help cure a very deadly superbug infection, which was featured in the book, The Perfect Predator. Hopefully we'll have time. We'll talk about how he broke up a spy ring called the Havana Turnaround, what happened when he was contacted to interview spy and KGB agent. And a great pleasure to welcome Robert, again, psychic intuitive counselor. He is recognized across the continent as one of the most insightful psychic intuitive counselors of his time. At a very young age, he realized his psychic gifts, started his first job working as a psychic intuitive, doing readings at the Cozy Tea Room in Toronto. He's traveled the world, giving insight with his psychic intuitive sessions to tens of thousands of people. He's become recognized across the continent as one of the most insightful counselors of his time. He's also worked with the police, Canadian Secret Service, helping to gather intel, work on missing persons cases. And currently, Robert is hosting his podcast, My Side of the Crystal Ball. And you can find the show on all the popular podcast platforms, including iHeart. And he's also an award-winning baker and I'm guessing a lifelong Toronto Maple Leafs fan. So we share that in common. Robert, welcome. How are you?
I'm well. I was listening to all the things that you're saying about me, and I'm thinking, did I do that? Are you sure? Are you reading the right bio? Like, wow.
This is your life, Robert Lindsey Milne.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, so thank you. I've been a fan of yours. I know a little bit about your career. I remember in the radio days. I think at one time, were you at one time on CFRB?
I was for many years. Yes, many.
I remember you from there.
Ah, yes, CFRB and sort of up and down the Toronto AM dial for about 20 years. I want to talk to you about Maple Leaf Gardens. I
Okay.
mentioned you're a Maple Leaf fan, and we were sharing a little story off the air. I mentioned that Mighty Aphrodite was almost born at Maple Leaf Gardens.
Yeah.
But I don't know, is it fair to say that it all began, your sort of recognition of your psychic ability at Maple Leaf Gardens during a Stanley Cup final between Toronto and Boston?
Well, it showed me in a very dynamic way what I was doing. And that was when I understood. I was 9 years old. That was when I understood that why the things that I said to people got me into trouble. I went to Williamson Road Public School in Toronto, and I came home from school, it was grade 1 or something, and I said to my mother, Grandma Harris died today. Well, now that was 1956, and Grandma Harris actually was my great-grandmother, and she lived in England. And news traveled slowly in those days. So I came home for lunch, and I said to my mother, Grandma Harris died. My mother freaked out, yelled at me, and, hit me for saying these terrible things again. I don't remember any of the other ones before that. And throughout my life in those early days, Uncle Harold, that wasn't Aunt Sally. Who was that? Well, that one got me. No, I didn't know any better. So anyway, and also my dad was a great hockey fan. That made me one. And my dad also believed I should play hockey for my profession. And he followed all the teams, and we got tickets or my dad did, and he took me with him, to semifinal Toronto Maple Leafs Boston. And this was back in the day. It was the first year Carl Brewer was in the league. Johnny Bauer had just come up from the minor leagues. Punch Imlock had just been the coach. So and they go from last place into fourth place, and they're in the semifinal. It's tied 1 game each. Toronto, Boston. We're playing at Maple Leaf Gardens. It was Thursday night, and at the end of the third period, the score was 1-1. And the teams went off for the first over, to take a rest, and they cleaned the ice. When the teams came on for the first overtime period, they just kind of went on the ice to stretch a bit.
Right.
And I saw number 17, Toronto Maple Leafs, Gary Eman, and I knew he was going to score. And that's kind of, by the way, he was, when I say a mediocre player, he was a mediocre player in the greatest hockey league in the world.
Right.
Certainly at that. Okay. So he wasn't a star, and he certainly wasn't a star, first place.
He wasn't a scrub.
Nope. So anyway, as they were just getting ready to start, the game, it got more and more, it got stronger and stronger and stronger. And it went from Gary Eman is going to score to Gary Eman has scored. And imagine 18,000 people. They're just about to start the game. Eman's on the bench, and the lights go down. Referee's about to, drop the puck. And I can't hold it inside anymore. And I jump up and start screaming and cheering and yelling in this silent building of 18,000 people. And everybody looked at me and my dad. And my dad said, "Sit down." And I did. And the game started. Referee drops the puck. The game starts. And I really wasn't paying attention to the game because I was blown away by what had just happened. A couple of minutes later, Eman jumps over the boards. Red Kelly passes the puck to him, and Eman tips it into the net. And the building erupts. And all the flashes are going off, and everybody's yelling and screaming. And I was looking around the building. And now this is a sophisticated way of saying what I experienced at 9. It was other people think differently. Mm. And the light went on. And that's when I stopped getting hit as much. That was, I started to understand.
Right. Did you ever get to meet Gary Eman?
Never got to meet Gary Eman.
You spent some time on the street.
I left home the first time at 14, and then the second time 15 and a half. 15, and I never lived back home with my family again full time. And while I was on the street, while I was surviving, used to hang around Ford Drugs. There was this old place called the Orange Spot, was a restaurant, hung out at the bus station and the train station. But remember, a few years ago, I had seen the light, so to speak, and I knew I was psychic. I knew I could do things. And while I was on the street, I always found what I needed. I almost always used my psychic ability to survive. The other thing is I never committed a crime when I was on the street. Never begged, never robbed. Mostly it was by my psychic ability. And I was doing readings for street people. Now, I wasn't doing card readings. I was, giving help to them. I heard if you worked at the Cozy Tea Room in the afternoon, you would get a sandwich, a cup of tea, some cookies, and you got paid after the shift. And then in the evening, if you worked there, you got a hot meal, cookies, a cup of tea, and paid. And I applied to the Cozy Tea Room. It was January 17th, 1965. And it was a really cold day that day. I had phoned. I was just 15 and a half. I had phoned the tea room, and I spoke to Mrs. Cox. She owned it. And I told her that I was a psychic and I could do readings. And she said, "Well, come down," and I did. And to get the job, I had to do a reading for her. I had never read a tea leaf. I had no idea what cards were, the cards. And all I did was I sat down, I picked up her teacup, I looked in the teacup, and I just pretended I was reading her tea leaves, and I was just being psychic. And the same with cards. I put the cards on the table. I had no idea what the 7 of Hearts was, but I related it. I put it in context of something I was telling her about her.
And was the 7? Mrs. Cox was suitably impressed.
Well, I got hired for sure, and she knew I was a kid, and I started working there that day. and I worked the afternoon shift and the night shift. And that night I had a place to sleep, and I had a hot meal. And the next day I had a job to go to. And I worked at the Cozy Tea Room until I was about 21.
Wow. Where was there? There's, I think it was a Cozy Tea Room on Girard, but that's not it, is it?
That's the one.
Oh, it is that. It is the
Yeah, it was west of Broadview.
Right.
I used to also live at Larry's Hideaway Hotel during the good days.
Larry's Hideaway.
That was stepping up,
Larry's Hideaway, yes.
Yeah.
And then how was it that we're kind of this is kind of an episode of This Is Your Life, Robert Lindsey Milne. But from there, I mean, how did you end up working with the Canadian Security Service? Are we talking about what is now called CSIS?
Well, in those days, the RCMP was in charge of the spies.
Right.
So that was the security, and they were specifically picked. It was a division, and these guys went to work in a suit, and they didn't carry guns, and they had expense accounts, and they watched and they checked out spies. That's what I was the first Canadian psychic to tour Canada doing call-in shows. I've been on 107 radio stations in Canada, east to west and north to south. And I was, and back in those days, it was there were no networks. If you were at a radio station, it's because your body was in the studio.
Right.
And I was auditioning to be on Lowell Green's show in Ottawa.
I worked with Lowell.
Okay. So this was in the 70s. It would have been 77 or 77. And I flew to Ottawa, applied for did the show that was applying for it. And I became a regular guest on Lowell's show in those days. Anyway, I got that, came back to Toronto, and a couple of days later, I can't remember who the news director was there at that time. Anyway, he called me and said, this fellow is contacting you. He's kind of a spy. He's with Task News Agency, and he would like to do an interview with you. And I said, I don't want anything to do with that. Just please leave me alone. I don't want. And that was also back in the days where they had phone books. So and I said, don't give him my number. Don't tell him where I am. And that was it. And a few days later, I started getting phone calls from friends saying, this guy with the RCMP has been called us, and they were asking questions. And then a few days after that, this guy called me from the RCMP, and he introduced himself, and he said that he wanted to talk to me about a non-criminal matter. And I said, is that about that guy in Ottawa? And he said, yes. And I said, I don't want anything to do with it. Please just leave me alone. And then he said, well, would you just please talk to us? And my partner will come in from Ottawa. Just please let us meet and talk. And I said, okay. And a couple of days later, his partner from Ottawa came, and he came up, and they came to see me at where my office was, and they started telling me about this guy. Anyway, he had contacted me, and I said it was, they wanted me to let him contact me, and they said to me that he is supposed to be a journalist with TASS, but he has a diplomatic passport.
Mm.
He had spent most of his time, his career, as an attaché to the Russian embassy in Washington, as well as he had his diplomatic passport, and he was a journalist. Out of nowhere, he got transferred from Washington to Ottawa. This is not a promotion.
Right.
This is not, because he had been there for years, and this was just coming to the end of the Brezhnev era.
Mm.
And Brezhnev was losing his power, and this guy got transferred, and he believed that his guys in Russia were losing power, and he was afraid, or our people thought he was afraid that he was going to get called home to Russia and then go to Siberia.
Mm-hmm.
And he was reaching out to me.
To defect?
That's what they thought.
Mm.
So I did a couple of psychic things for them in my office, and I came up with a name, not the one that you mentioned. I came up with another name, and these two guys looked at each other, and they were like shocked, and they said, nobody knows that name. And they said, you're absolutely on the other side, or you really are psychic.
They thought you were a Russian spy, or
well, because of the name I came
other.
up with. The name, that's right. They just said, this is either what it can be, because there's no other way you could have had that name. Or cannot. It was Bolitnikov, by the way. It was a secret name back then. It was Bolitnikov.
Wow, that was his code name. What?
Yeah.
Why did he? Just because he heard you on the radio on Lowell Green's show, he felt that he could open up to you? Why did he want to come contact you?
Well, this was all above me in terms of what and over the years, I've kind of understood it. So he wanted to get a psychic reading from me. And we arranged that I would do a psychic. When I agreed to it, the Mounties told me what hotel I was going to be staying at and stuff like that. And I told this guy, and he had my phone number there, and we set up a time. And on the day of of that meeting, and the next day I was on with Lowell Green, they met me at my house in Toronto, the Mounties, and they took me to the airport, and we got on a government plane and flew to Ottawa. It was like really cool, like being like, and then we got to the hotel, and I just went straight up to the room, and no checking in, no nothing. I didn't, they just took they took care of my bags, everything. And in the room that I was in, it had two adjoining rooms, like in the hotel, and the room that I was in was wired, and there were Mounties on both sides, and like there were 6 or 7 guys there, and they and this is and what I'm about to say is the only time in my career ever that I allowed myself to get they showed me his dossier, his life story, and they were letting me read it to improve the reading. And it's the first time I've ever done anything like that, and I've never done anything because wait till you hear what happens. So I learn about his life. He comes in. Oh, and they also said, don't get startled if he sits really close to you or he touches you. He said, because they're much more tactile than us. So he said, just don't get freaked out. Anyway, he came in, and the Mounties said, somewhere along the line in your reading, this is what we want you to say. I don't quite remember all the words exactly, but it was saying that, sometimes when you're in trouble, there are friends that you never would have thought would be your friends. It was something like that. I can't remember. So as soon as I started doing the reading for this guy, I realized that the information I had was wrong. So I pretended, I hadn't been, briefed before, and then I just did a reading for him.
Interesting.
I then gave him the magic words. And I was recording the reading as myself, right? Because I recorded in cassette then. As I said those words, he looked at me, stood up, turned around, walked straight out the door. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't say a word, and he just left. And then the Mounties came in and said, "Oh, great job you did, Robert." And I said, "The guy just split." And he said, "They always do that when you imply around them to defect. That's the way they act."
Right. And so,
then I did Lowell's show the next day and did a bunch of readings in Ottawa, and then they said, we might not ever know what happened. A few weeks later, the first guy that contacted me was down in Niagara Falls. And in the 1970s, more intelligence was being shared across the Canadian-American border in Niagara Falls than anywhere in the world.
Oh, wow.
And this guy, the man, I'm not going to mention his name. He was in on hearing what I was doing, and he heard and saw on several different occasions what I was doing, and he called me and he said, "Do you think you could find things?" I said, "Oh, sure, okay," because these guys after work partied a lot. So, and I just said, "Oh, sure," and he said, "Well, do you think you could come down to Niagara Falls at the division, and see if you can?" So I did. Oh, I had a Sunday night radio show on CJRN in Niagara Falls on Sunday nights then. So I went down early, and I went to the station, and we looked at maps, and he wanted me to look for what was called dead letter boxes. And that's where intelligence was being passed.
Right.
So I looked at a bunch of maps, and I would point to different spots, and then we would go out into the park and find the spots. And I did that, every month or two for a couple of years, and we found a lot of stuff.
Russian dead letter drops.
Cuban was a big deal then. Yeah.
Amazing.
And Cuban, there were a lot of Cuban and Russian and East German.
I mean, that's fantastic. You're leading this double life.
Well, for me, it was the party afterwards too, and it was kind of exciting being around these guys. But I never thought of it as it was just what I did.
Yeah. Did that lead directly into helping police find missing persons?
Just let me tell you. So about a year into looking for dead letterboxes, one day in the park, he turns at me and he says, "Your Russian friend." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, it worked out well. That's all I ever heard.
Presumably he defected.
I would assume, but that's all I ever heard. All he said was it turned out well.
Wow.
Okay.
Missing people. Yeah.
Well, I got forced into that. By the way, that one was another one. I didn't want to do that kind of stuff. I wanted to go on call-in shows. I wanted to do readings for the people on the air, and then I wanted them to come to meet me at the hotel, and I was going to do a reading for them there. That's the way I made my living. That's what I wanted to do. I wasn't interested in finding lost people or dead people, or I was doing readings, and that's what I've done my lifetime, Richard. I do readings, and I'm pretty good at it. So when I would go on tour, I usually didn't have very much money. I called it my front money to get to the next cities. So the very first city I would go to would be Barrie. And dollar for dollar, that was the best city, because I would drive up in the morning, check into the Bayshore Inn, and then go on I think it's CKBB in Barrie. And I would go on that show. First was Ron Knight. I can't remember the other guy's name. Anyway, so I would go on that show, run back to the Bayshore, answer the phone, book a bunch of readings in the late afternoon and evening, and then some the next morning. And then I would drive back to Toronto, and that would be my front money to get to Sarnia. Right. And then I'd do okay in Sarnia, and then I'd get plane tickets to fly to Edmonton. That's how I did it. So this one time, it's on a Thursday. I'm doing readings, and there's a knock at the door, and I'm thinking, what are you doing? Like, how dare you interrupt me? And I open the door, and there's two cops there. And Barrie police, and they say, "Can we talk to you?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm in the middle of working." And they say, "Well, we want you to do something." And they mentioned it, and I said, "Well, I'm in the middle of doing readings." And they said, "Well, we want you to help us." And I said, "I don't want to do it." And they said, do you want to do readings? And I said, yes. And they said, then you have to help us.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was back in the days when the Witchcraft Act. So you know about that one, right?
No.
Oh, well, up until July 1st of 2018, no, 19, Section 326 of the Criminal Code, called the Witchcraft Act, states anyone who fraudulently tells fortunes for a consideration, accuses somebody of an occult or crafty science, pretends to or professes to cure or heal someone using an occult or crafty science, I can't remember what the other one is punishable by summary conviction of no longer than 1 year in jail and $5,000 fine.
How long had that been on the books?
Oh, about 1890.
Oh, wow.
Okay, and they could have done it like every day of my life. Oh, and Justin, the same year he legalized pot, he legalized fortune telling too. I don't think there's any correlation.
Robert, pardon the interruption. I got to take a quick time out. We'll come back and we'll talk about the Barrie police and how you were forced into helping them find missing people. Stay with us. Every new season, we find a reason to improve our lives and our health. And C60 Evo organic edible oils deliver noticeable benefits quickly. A spoonful in the morning delivers energy and endurance all day long. And I sleep deeper and wake up feeling refreshed because C60 ESS60 works. Carbon 60 received the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1996 when it was used for industrial applications. C60 Evo's ESS60 is a breakthrough technology upgrading C60 to be safe for human and pet consumption. ESS60 has been called a miracle molecule because of the physical and mental benefits people are enjoying. Their lab has a proven track record of 31 years and thousands of happy customers across the world, just like me. So treat yourself, your friends, and your family to C60 Evo and use my link, EVRS, to get 10% off your first order. Again, my link, EVRS, to get 10% off your first order. Robert Lindsey Milne is with us, psychic intuitive counselor, teacher, healer, life coach. So you're in Barrie, you're doing readings, knock at the door. It's two of Barrie's finest.
Yep.
And they're telling you, come help them find a missing person.
It was a command.
Okay. Yes, you will come with us.
And I said, okay, I'll do it, but I have to finish my readings tonight. And I finished at about 10. It was in the cold weather. And they came back, and then they took me down to the station, and we had a little talk, and they told me the background. I'm not going to bring up any names, but there was this woman in Barrie, and she was a nurse, and she was married and in a very stable, healthy marriage, and she had a little boy, and she was the perfect mother. And she had some time off this one day. And so she booked a hairstylist appointment. And then she, on her way to the appointment, she dropped her son at, I guess the Y, I think it was, at the daycare. Then she went to the plaza. She was never seen again. Her car was at the plaza. The hair salon was within a very short walking distance. Nobody saw her, and no one ever saw her again. And they had exhausted all their leads, and there was a lot of pressure, and they were really under a lot of pressure, and they weren't reaching out to me thinking that I could help. They were reaching out to me because there was nothing else. So I was down at the police station, and then we looked at maps again, because that was what I had done with the Mounties, right? I had that experience. And so I looked at the maps and said, okay, first of all, you're not going to find her tonight. We won't, and you're not going to find her until spring. But you will find her near this area. And I pointed a spot on the map, and I said, what will be recognizable is that there is an old train trestle, hasn't been used in years, and carved on, I'm seeing 1910. So they say, let's go look. And I say, okay, because I'm doing everything they want, because I want to do work, I want to work the next day. So we out driving through the wilderness. Probably it's all subdivision now, but it was wilderness then. And we're driving around, and they weren't taking me seriously. And in fact, they were they weren't particularly respectful, but they had guns. And so and I was in the back of the car. So as we're driving around, they drive on this gravel road, and it's at night, and it's cold, and we're driving up, and there is this old train trestle, and on the train trestle says 1910. And these guys both look at me, and anyway, the next day they had this big team come out and search. They couldn't find anything. And it wasn't until about late April that some kids were playing, and they found her remains.
Wow.
Mm.
Did you get a letter?
I did my best never for it to be known.
Why is that?
It's not what I want to do.
Oh, because
you see, I don't have the character to tell somebody, because most of the time when a psychic gets called in on a missing person or whatever, the person's dead.
Yeah, bad news.
I don't have what it takes to look at somebody and say your child's dead, or your mother's dead, or I just can't do it and be healthy.
Yeah. So you didn't want it to be known that that you were good at this.
Yes, and I've always kept it a secret.
So tell me about you. There was a coma patient. You helped.
Help find a cure for
an
incurable disease. Now, Richard, I have to tell you, I did play a big part, but I was a long way away from being the star of the show. And what I did is I helped prove there were 3 different times when the patient, who had been in a coma for a total of 8 months, by the way, there were 3 different times where if a psychic, one of my kind, if a psychic hadn't been involved, he would have died. Okay, so, and I'm sharing it because I'm not the only guy on the planet that could have done it. There's a lot of people. It was just my number came up. I got the turn. That's the only reason. So, and I share that with my fellow psychics, that this breakthrough, and because it's and incidentally, and the book is written by it's called The Perfect Predator, is written by a epidemiologist who found the cure. And in the book is what I've done. So, I have known these 2 people, this man and woman. The woman's name, her name is Stephanie. I can tell you this one, Stephanie Strathdee, and she's a Toronto girl, by the way. And I did her first reading when she had just finished her PhD in epidemiology at the U of T. Her husband, and now she is a professor of epidemiology at the University of Southern California, and she's associate dean of the epidemiology department. And she is a famous, she's one of ours, right? She's a famous epidemiologist around the world, and she has a very, very high standing. Like, she's a star in her field. Her husband, Tom, has a PhD in experimental psychology and a PhD in psychiatry, and he is a professor at the same university and at the experimental psychology department, and he's an associate dean as well. Tom is older than Stephanie. They're different generations, but Stephanie now is in her late 50s. And Tom is in his 70s now. Tom is like he reminds me of like now I just forgot. I forgot what I was, the series where the guy was this anyway, Tom reminds me of a real kind of macho kind of guy, 6'5", and like really healthy. Indiana Jones. He reminds me of a modern day. It all comes back. I'm 73, man. The words that get stuck a bit sometimes. So anyway, he kind of reminds you of that kind of guy. Early in his career, he got kidnapped by the Sandinistas when he was doing research in the jungle, and just about starved to death. And he's that kind of guy. Anyway, he had ballooned up to over 300 pounds. And I'd done readings for him and his partner and Stephanie. And a year before all this happening, I had done a reading for Tom. And the way I give information, well, bad news anyway, is that when I'm doing a reading for somebody, I often see their life from conception to completion. I don't see the pictures at the beginning or the end or how that happened. I just see the line starting and the line ending. And when I'm doing a reading for somebody, I often am looking forward and backward in time throughout their whole reading. And when somebody's going through a difficult time, let's say someone's 37 and I'm doing a reading for them, I look into the future. Now, before I talk about where they are right now, I look into the future when they're, say, 75 or 80, and then look back through their eyes at that age, and I describe to them how they feel about the way they solved the problem that they're struggling with right now today. That's how I give. I thought all psychics did that. I found out that very few do.
Yeah, I've never heard that before. That's a very different way.
So when I have bad news, and when something can be seen, it can be changed. If so, destiny cannot be changed, therefore you can't see it. Okay, so that we can talk about later. So when I give bad news, and my readings are an hour. When I give bad news, I might take a half an hour or longer to give it to them. So I'll be doing their reading and I'll be going forward and backwards, and then I'll be up, say I'll talk about where they are at, say, 60, and then I'll just mention, just like a little wee mention of something, but then change the subject and talk about the good things that's going to happen because of the calamity this poor person is going to be going through. And then I come back and they drop another hint, and then do other stuff, and then talk about the positive result, but they don't know how they're going to get to it. And then by the time I give them the information, they're already grasping it.
Right.
Therefore, they're not panicked.
Got it. You dole it out in little tidbits and
absolutely
put pieces together,
and let them put it together themselves.
Right.
So there are times, though, that I am a bit more direct. And in doing a reading for Tom that summer, I said to him, Tom, in 2 years from now, or 3 years from now, you're going to weigh 100 pounds less than what you do right now. Change the subject and start talking about it. And then I said, by the way, there's an illness coming. And you're going to get as sick as you possibly can get sick. And I told him where it was. As possibly as sick as you can get without dying. And you're going to lose more than 100 pounds. And then I said, Tom, it seems to me that the 100 pounds is going to be lost, whether you do something about it or whether you don't. And I'm thinking that if what I've said to you has frightened you and you get real serious, and take care of yourself, then you'll miss the illness. If you do it differently, then you'll experience the illness, be as sick as you can get without dying, and then lose more than 100 pounds and live on. And I was just direct with him. I said, Tom, it's up to you. You can do it the easy way, or you can do it the hard way. And he chose the hard way. Him and Stephanie were going away on one of their amazing journeys, vacations, and they were and Tom was sick, by the way. He was having trouble. So I don't understand the medical stuff. He had a pseudocyst on his pancreas. I have no idea what the heck that means. Anyway, so so they go away on their vacation. Tom's not feeling very well. They're going through pyramids and stuff. When they're in this pyramid, Tom gets sick, falls asleep, or gets sick and passes out in the pyramid. He gets carried out back to the hotel. The doctor comes and says, boy, you're really, really sick. And they take him to the hospital in Egypt, in Cairo. And while he is in Cairo, he contacts the most potent superbug on the planet. And at the time, it was 100% antibiotic resistant.
Wow.
It means if you get it, you die. And he got it. And Tom and Stephanie, they were medevac to a clinic in Germany. And he was in isolation. Everyone's wearing hazmat suits and stuff like that. And that time, it was near Christmas. And I remember I was really sick that Christmas. I was just feeling absolutely awful. And I didn't want to get out of bed. Well, I had trouble getting out of bed. And my Skype phone call rang, and not my phone, the video. And I kind of crawled out of bed, and I had Stephanie on my mind a lot over that 2 weeks, when they were away. And when I answered, it was her calling. And the first thing I said to her was, and this is in the book, by the way, I said to her, what took you so long? I've been waiting. And that's what I first said to her. And then she sort of told me, I created a mental link with Tom when he was in a coma. And I lived with that link in my head and mind, connected to him 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 8 months. And I knew what was going on with him 24/7. I knew when he was in trouble. I knew when his vital signs changed. I knew when he was okay. I often knew what he needed. And at the same time, I was also coaching, helping Stephanie. So here is this epidemiologist, this brilliant epidemiologist, and she's stuck with her husband dying. And incidentally, she studied that superbug and wrote a paper on it for her PhD before it was antibiotic resistant.
Robert, pardon the interruption. There'll be a bit of a cliffhanger here. We're going to take another time. I will come. November reminds us to be thankful and focused on boosting our radiant health before winter. And I use a potent remedy that's improved the quality of my life and deepened my sleep as well. I take C60 Evo olive oil every morning, and I have a lot more energy and mental focus all day long. My workouts are easier, and I have a lot more endurance. If you're into competitive sports, this is a game changer. Health is our greatest wealth, and Pura C60 ESS60 really works. ESS60 is a breakthrough technology delivering the carbon-60 miracle molecule for humans and pets. Check out the C60 Evo holiday gift collections for everyone on your list. They make amazing skin, lip, and hair repair serum that deliver noticeable results quickly. C60 Evo's lab has an impressive track record of 31 years and, of course, my personal recommendation. You deserve the best remedies on earth, and so do those you love. Buy direct from the lab and upgrade your life today. Use my code EVRS to save 10% off your first order. Again, my code EVRS and save 10% off your first order. All right, we are back with Robert Lindsey Milne. The website, incidentally, is, and it's in the episode notes, the link, but it's rlmreadsyou.com. RLM, as in Robert Lindsey Milne, reads you, YOU.com. All right, so Tom in a coma, 8 months. His wife is a superstar epidemiologist. He has contracted this antibiotic-resistant superbug while on holidays in Egypt, medevac to a clinic in Germany. And you were saying that his wife, Stephanie, had written her PhD, basically, on,
Yes,
on
this particular
same superbug.
Before it became antibiotic resistant. It took like 30 years of evolution. So there she was, and by the way, she's an A personality and a little bit like Sheldon Cooper. She's got like a photogenic brain. She remembers everything. So I said to her, you've experienced and had experience with every type of issue that you would need to find the cure. And if you focus on it, you can find the cure. And she took it upon herself to find the cure. And I was having meetings with Stephanie every day, sometimes twice a day. And now Stephanie created this worldwide collaboration of some of the most brilliant minds on the planet. And she found the cure. And she did it with the collaboration of brilliant people around the world that got involved. And when she was looking, and this is like after like 6 months, 7 months, Tom had been in septic shock 7 different times while he was in a coma. There was one time when Tom was in the coma early in Germany, and the way I knew he was okay is I visualized the candle and the flame lit. And when the flame was strong, I knew he was okay. Well, for the position he was in, he was okay. He wasn't imminently dying. And when the flame would start to flicker, I knew there would be a problem. And there was this one time when it looked like it was going out, and Tom was in crisis, and the machines said it too. But they couldn't find what was causing the problem. And I said to Stephanie, Tom needs to see his daughters. Tom, he's alone. He's cold. He doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know what's happening, but he can hear people saying he's going to die. He needs to see his daughters. Yesterday's would have been a good day. Today's a good day. Tomorrow, not so good. Wait longer. Don't bother. Mm. That night, by the way, Stephanie gave me permission to say it exactly like it is and don't hold anything back. So that's why I was speaking so directly. Anyway, several hours later, I noticed the flame is in my mind. I noticed the flame was getting stronger. And I knew that something had happened. And it turned out that his daughters had flown from California to Germany. And that was the time when all of his vital signs started coming back, was when he connected with his kids. Now, if a psychic hadn't been involved in that, Richard, Tom would have died. And what we have proven, because I'm sharing this with my brothers and sisters, what we have been able to do is prove that some coma patients can hear what they're saying. And that's such a big deal. And we proved it, not just me, because there's so many people that can do that.
Right. Yeah, they say that even in the dying process, that's one of the last things that goes is your hearing. And so, if you're with loved ones and it's nearing the time for them to transition, speak to them. They can hear you. They can hear.
Yeah, and what you're doing is saying the last words that they're going to be hearing as they complete their life. And consider that. So, do you want to, have negative things, or do you just want to talk about how much you love them and blah blah blah, and be mindful of that. So Stephanie and Tom was, then medevac back to California, and the scientists and geniuses in California were working on him. And again, he was dying. Stephanie, and the clock was ticking. Stephanie had narrowed it down to 3 different choices, and she had gone with all the scientists, and then I was the last person she spoke to about this. And she said, here it is, these are the 3. And she starts off and she says, number 1, it's phages. And I said, that one. And she said, well, let me tell you about it. And she did. And I said, that one. And then she said, well, let me tell you about the other 2. And I said, that one. And then she said, I'm telling you about the other 2. And I said, okay. And she told me about the other 2, and I have no idea what they are. And I just said the first one. And she said, why? And I said, because think of little Pac-Man that will attack the superbug, kill it, and eat it. And she said, that's what it does. Wow. And she made her choice. Now she had huge piles of scientific information, as well as, it wasn't just because I said that, right? It was all the people saying it. But I was, that was the last, straw. And phages. Phages come from unsanitized sewer water. Phages are excrement. And during the 1930s and 20s in Russia, they were doing experiments with people that had lower organ illnesses. And they were treating them by injecting them, I guess anally, with stool, pure raw stool. And they were getting, and the concept was the good germs, bacteria will kill the bad bacteria. That was the concept. And they were getting results. And then penicillin came around. So you had your choice of a pill or a turd. And, they went, most people picked the pill. So they stopped doing research, and Stephanie found the cure. And right up until Tom was about a few hours from death, and no one had ever been injected IV with this treatment, and they didn't know whether it was going to kill him or they didn't know. And Tom had been in that coma for 8 months, and they injected him, and he kind of twitched and didn't die, and his vital signs got a bit stronger. And then they said, oh, let's give him another one. And they did that, and he got stronger and stronger. And through the night, they kept, hitting him up with these phages. And the next morning, Stephanie was there, and she came over to him, and she looked down, and Tom looked up, his eyes opened, and he came out of the coma. He awoke from the coma, looked at her, they made eye contact, and then he fell asleep and never was in a coma again.
Wow. While he was in that coma, and you had a mental link.
Yes.
Did he have any memory of that? Did he have any knowledge of that?
He didn't consciously have, he had a lot of hallucinations, and there were times where he sensed things, and it would have been me, but it was, not, he wouldn't have seen it like that. He didn't see it himself. But in the book, The Perfect Predator, he writes it from his side, and Stephanie writes it from her side.
Remarkable story. Tell me about your podcast, Robert.
My podcast is called My Side of the Crystal Ball. And I'd been in semi-retirement for several years. I didn't give up doing readings. I never will. But I stopped touring and doing shows, and just been an old-fashioned kind of stay-at-home kind of psychic for 6, 7, 8 years. And when the perfect predator came along, and I just took it, the job, right? The job, like I took the assignment. It was, I could have turned it down, but I took it. And when the book came out, I started getting some attention, and I reluctantly went on a couple of podcasts because, I was a little nervous that the younger ones were going to be a lot better than me, or I was going to be just a little bit too slow these days. I was worried about that. But I went on a couple of call-in shows, and it seems like they're not better than me, and I still have it, sort of, I guess. And all of a sudden, I started appearing on podcasts. Michelle started booking them for me. Michelle Fried from Leave It to Michelle. That's her website. Leave It to Michelle. She's my agent and publicist. About a year and a half ago, she said, "Well, would you like to do a podcast?" And I said, "Well, I can't do that." And I don't, it's just beyond me. So now I have this one. It's called My Side of the Crystal Ball. And it's really great. And we're getting lots of, we're starting to get lots of views and lots of responses. And I appear on about 40 podcasts a year as well. So
Nice.
after 58 years on the job, Richard, I'm an overnight success.
58 years in the making. Wow, just some mind-blowing stories there, Robert.
Thank you.
I got one quick assignment for you. Actually,
Please.
this is going to air after tomorrow's Leaf game against the Penguins, and
You do realize that I don't watch sports at all anymore.
Oh, no.
The Leafs broke me like years ago.
Yeah, you and a lot of other people.
Yeah, they broke me. It's going to be a really tight game. I don't know. I'm just off the top of my head. I haven't done any thinking about it. I think Leafs are going to like maybe win by a goal, one way or the other.
Okay. All right, that's good news. I'll hang on to that.
Okay.
I will hang on to that. Leafs and Penguins.
Yeah, they love. Yeah, they broke my heart just too many times.
Yeah, I can empathize. Just one before I die. That's all I'm
Because
asking.
I saw the 1967 Stanley Cup. I wasn't at the game, but I saw it on TV.
That was the last one.
It was.
All right. Hope springs eternal, even in the dead of winter. Robert, what a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Richard, thank you.
A new Richard Syrett's Strange Planet drops every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Subscribe at strangeplanetpodcast.com.